The lobby of Delvane Grand Casino was designed to make people feel like they had arrived somewhere. Not just somewhere nice, somewhere that had been waiting for them. Specifically, a place that had held its breath until the moment they walked through the revolving glass doors and let it all out in a long, warm exhale of amber light and low music and the clean, faintly sweet smell of recirculated air that cost more per hour to maintain than most hotel rooms cost per night. Marcus Delvany had specified that smell himself back when the building was still a blueprint spread across a folding table in a rented office in Henderson. He had told the interior consultant, "I want people to feel like they've been upgraded the second they walk in. I don't care what it costs." She had looked at him the way people sometimes looked at him then, like she was trying to work out whether he was serious or performing seriousness. And then she had nodded and written it down, and he had made sure it happened. That was 11 years ago. Tonight, Marcus walked through those same revolving doors with his daughter Zoe's hand in his left hand and his phone in his right, the screen face down. And he looked like a man who had dressed in the dark. Dark polo shirt worn at the collar, khaki trousers with a small ink stain near the right pocket that he had noticed that morning and decided not to worry about. Leather loafers that had been expensive once and now mostly just looked comfortable. No watch, no jewelry, a haircut that was 2 weeks overdue. He looked, in other words, like a man who had somewhere more important to be and had only stopped in here because someone had asked him to. Zoe was 10 years old and had her father's eyes and her mother's ability to notice everything without appearing to notice anything. She was wearing a purple hoodie with the hood down and her hair in 2 braids that Marcus had done himself that morning, imperfectly, which she had informed him of 3 times before they left the house. She looked around the lobby the way children look at airports, not with wonder exactly, but with a kind of careful accounting, as if she were pricing each thing against some internal budget of impressiveness she had not yet told anyone about. "The lights are different than I expected," she said. "Different how?" "More gold. I thought it would be more white. White lights feel richer on TV." "Gold lights feel warmer in person," Marcus said. "Warmer means people stay longer." Zoe considered this. "That's kind of manipulative." "Most things in hospitality are a little," he said, and squeezed her hand once. He was looking at the floor as he said it, not at Zoe, not at the slot machines ranked in their gleaming rows to the left, not at the poker tables further back, where a Tuesday night crowd of maybe 60 people moved with the particular loose energy of people who have decided to stop being careful for a few hours. He was looking at the floor because the floor told him things. The grout between the marble tiles near the eastern entrance had been resealed recently, which meant someone had filed the maintenance report he had flagged 2 quarters ago, and someone else had actually acted on it. Good. Near the central bar, 2 tiles had a faint discoloration that suggested a cleaning solution had been used at full concentration instead of diluted. He filed that away. His eyes moved without hurrying. He did this 4 times a year, sometimes more, always unannounced. His director of operations, a meticulous woman named Carol Weston, referred to these visits as his ghost walks, which Marcus found accurate. He was not here to catch people doing things wrong. He was here to see what the place looked like when no one was performing for the owner. The difference between those 2 things was, in his experience, where all the real information lived. Along the far wall, past the concierge desk, a row of framed photographs ran in a horizontal band at eye level. The casino at various stages of construction, then at its opening night, then at its 5th anniversary gala, then 3 years ago, when they had completed the North Wing expansion. In the opening night photograph, Marcus stood in the center of a group of about 20 people grinning, wearing a suit he had bought 2 weeks before because he had not owned anything he felt was right for the occasion. He was 31 years old in that photograph. In the dark polo shirt and ink-stained khakis, he he was wearing now, walking past that photograph, he bore just enough resemblance to that younger man that someone paying close attention might have paused. No one was paying close attention. Zoe stopped in front of the photographs. She looked at the opening night one for a long moment, then looked up at Marcus. "That's you," she said. "That's me." "You look scared." "I was," he said. She looked at the photo again. "You're not now." "No," he agreed. "Not the same kind of scared, anyway." She seemed to accept that as a complete thought, which it was, and they moved on. Near the column at the edge of the main floor, a big man in a security uniform was standing with his arms loose at his sides, watching the room with the alert, patient stillness of someone who had been doing this long enough that watching rooms had become something close to a resting state. His name was James Okafor, and he had been at Delvane Grand since 3 months before it opened, hired by Marcus personally after a 40-minute conversation in which James had said almost nothing, and Marcus had found that reassuring rather than worrying. James was 53 years old and had been a corrections officer, then a private security contractor, then briefly a middle school PE teacher, before concluding that middle schoolers were, in his words, the only thing that ever genuinely frightened me. James saw Marcus the moment Marcus came through the revolving door. His body didn't change. Same loose arms, same patient stillness. But something behind his eyes shifted. The way a room shifts when someone turns on a light in an adjacent room and only the glow comes under the door. He took one step toward the center of the floor. Marcus caught his eye and gave one small, slow shake of his head. Not now. James read it the way he had read 100 small signals across 11 years of working for this particular man. And he stopped, and he looked away, and he went back to watching the room. Zoe had not seen any of this. "Can we get something to eat?" she asked. "In a bit," Marcus said. "I want to walk a little more first." "You said that in the car, too." "I know." "Dad, 20 minutes, he said. "Then we'll eat wherever you want." "The noodle place in the food court?" "The noodle place in the food court," he confirmed. She nodded, satisfied with the contract. Marcus's phone buzzed in his hand. He turned the screen up briefly. Board 9, p.m., reminder. He turned it back down. The board call could wait 40 minutes. It was a standing briefing, not an emergency, and he had spent too many evenings in the last 3 years letting the standing briefings pull him away from the non-standing hours with his daughter. He was working on that. He guided Zoe toward the northern end of the main floor, moving at the unhurried pace of someone with no particular destination. Past the baccarat tables, past the high-limit room with its frosted glass doors, past the hospitality desk where a young woman was explaining something to a couple with a patience that suggested she had explained the same thing several times and had decided somewhere around the third explanation to simply become the kind of person for whom this was not a problem. Marcus watched her for a moment. Good instincts. He didn't know her name. He made a note to find out. The VIP lounge was at the far northern end, past a short corridor lined with the kind of art that is expensive enough to signal expense without being interesting enough to require engagement. The entrance was marked by a pair of dark wooden doors, tall and slightly dramatic, with a small brushed gold plaque that read, Platinum Lounge, and beneath it, in smaller letters, Platinum members and reserved guests only. Marcus had approved the design of those doors. He had approved the plaque. He had not approved, as he would discover in the next several minutes, what had been happening on the other side of them. He walked toward the corridor with Zoe beside him, his phone face down in his hand, his ink-stained trousers, and his 2 weeks overdue haircut, and his general air of a man who had somewhere more important to be carrying him forward in the amber light of a place he had built from a blueprint on a folding table. And someone near the entrance to that corridor watched him come and adjusted his posture very slightly. the way people do when they have already made a decision about someone and are simply waiting for the situation to confirm it. The man near the entrance to the Platinum Lounge corridor was named Derek Solano, and he had the kind of handsomeness that had served him well in his 20s, and now, at 38, had calcified into something that read less as attractive and more as groomed. He wore his jacket with the small gold VIP floor manager pin on the lapel, the way some men wear a uniform not as clothing, but as an argument. He stood with his weight distributed in the particular way of someone who has been told, either by a supervisor or by some internal conviction they have never examined, that their job is to be a gatekeeper first and a host second. Marcus and Zoe turned into the corridor. Derek stepped forward smoothly, not aggressively, the movement of someone who has performed this particular choreography many times and has the timing down to a small art. "Good evening," Derek said, with the calibrated warmth of someone whose warmth has been measured and found professionally adequate. His eyes moved over Marcus once quickly, the way you check a price tag before deciding whether to look more closely, and then settled into the neutral zone just above Marcus's shoulder. "The Platinum Lounge is reserved for Platinum tier members and guests with prior reservations. Can I help you find something on the main floor this evening?" "We're just looking to go in," Marcus said simply. He did not adjust his voice or his posture. He did not lean in or stand straighter. He said it the way a man says something he believes is a fact and has not yet been given a reason to argue about. Derek's expression held. "Of course. If you could show me your Platinum membership card, or if I can pull up a reservation under your name." "Marcus Delvain," Marcus said. Derek glanced at the small tablet he was holding, the reservation management system which Marcus's tech team had built in-house 2 years ago, and which Marcus had suggested specifically because it reduced manual errors in guest management by about 30%. Derek scrolled with one finger. "I'm not seeing a reservation under that name this evening." "I don't have a reservation," Marcus said. "I understand." Derek's voice had not changed in temperature, but something in the architecture of it had shifted the way the temperature of a room doesn't change, but the air becomes somehow less available. "Without either a current Platinum membership or a prior reservation, I'm not able to authorize entry to this lounge. I'd be happy to help you explore our main floor offerings, or I can direct you to the signature restaurant on the second level, which doesn't require—" "Dad," Zoe said. Not a question. Just his name the way she said it sometimes when she was watching something and wanted to make sure he was watching it too. Marcus followed her gaze. To the left of Derek, just past his shoulder, the tall wooden doors of the Platinum Lounge were in the process of opening from the inside, held by a smiling young attendant in a white vest to admit a couple who had appeared from the main corridor behind Marcus and Zoe. The man was in a pale blue sports shirt untucked, his hair still damp at the temples, in a way that suggested he had come straight from somewhere and not stopped to fully prepare. The woman beside him was in a floral sundress and carrying a plastic souvenir cup from the casino gift shop, which cost $4.95 and contained a fluorescent cocktail. They were laughing about something as they walked. They were not holding membership cards. They were not asked for membership cards. Derek turned slightly to acknowledge them, not fully, just a partial turn, the minimal rotation of someone acknowledging a transaction they have already approved, and gave a brief, genuine smile. The wooden doors widened. The couple walked through, the souvenir cup catching the warm light from inside for just a moment before the doors eased shut again. The whole thing took perhaps 12 seconds. Zoe looked up at her father. Her expression was not angry. It was the expression of a child who has just encountered something that does not compute and is applying everything she has to making it compute and cannot quite get there. "Dad," she said again, "how come they get to go in?" Marcus looked at his daughter for a moment. The question sat in the air between them, clean and exact the way children's questions do. No hedging, no softening, no awareness that the question had edges. He put his hand on her shoulder gently, the warmth of it deliberate. He was aware of Derek standing 2 feet away, close enough to have heard. He was aware of a server nearby, a young woman in the white vest uniform, carrying an empty tray, who had also been close enough to hear and was now developing a sudden intense interest in the middle distance. "I don't know yet," Marcus said to Zoe. It was technically true. He looked up at Derek. "Can I get your name and your supervisor's name?" "I'm Derek Solano, VIP, floor manager." The pin on the lapel mentioned now as a credential. "And I've explained our policy clearly. I'd encourage you to enjoy the rest of the main floor and our other amenities. If you're interested in applying for Platinum membership, I can point you to the rewards desk near the main entrance, and they can walk you through." "Your supervisor," Marcus said. Just those 2 words, the same even tone he had used for everything else. Derek's jaw tightened briefly, like something being pressed and releasing. That would be Mr. Hargrove, the COO. He's not on floor tonight. The floor manager on duty, then? A pause. "That would be me." "I understand," Marcus said. He used the same phrase Derek had used with no particular emphasis, and something moved very briefly across Derek's face. Not enough to describe, just enough to register, and then it was gone. Marcus looked down at Zoe. "How about we sit for a few minutes?" Zoe, who was 10 and had inherited from her father the specific patience of someone who has decided not to rush a thing, nodded. There was a cluster of low chairs and a side table near the corridor entrance, positioned for exactly this kind of waiting guests, waiting for their reservation time guests, waiting for companions. The lounge's polished management of the people who were almost inside, but not yet inside. Marcus guided Zoe to 2 of those chairs and sat down. He placed his phone on the table, face down. He settled his hands in his lap. He looked at nothing in particular with the quality of attention of a man who is in fact looking at everything. Derek watched him for a moment from near the lounge entrance, visibly recalibrating something, and then turned back toward the doors with the decision in his bearing that the matter was settled. Marcus slid his phone across the table so the corner faced Zoe. She picked it up, unlocked it with the thumbprint she had memorized 2 years ago when her father had decided this was safer than not knowing, and pulled up whatever she was currently reading on it. Her feet didn't quite reach the floor from the chair and swung slightly, heels tapping the air. A few feet away, near the drink station at the side of the corridor, the server in the white vest her name badge read, Priya, had resumed her work with the kind of deliberate efficiency that people use to cover the fact that they are paying very close attention to something they are not sure what to do about yet. She glanced at Marcus and Zoe once, then back at her tray, then sideways toward the lounge doors where Derek had repositioned himself with the settled authority of someone who believes they have handled a situation correctly. Marcus watched Priya for exactly 2 seconds. He noted the quality of her discomfort. He noted that she had not looked away as quickly as most people look away from things they want to pretend they did not see. He noted everything. Zoe looked up from the phone. "Dad, the noodle place closes at 10. "I know. It's 8:17. "I know, Zoe." She looked at him for a moment, with the particular look she had developed recently. Not quite suspicious, not quite understanding. Something in between a look that asked a question. It wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Then she went back to the phone. Marcus picked up the small card holder that sat on the side table between them. A promotional holder for the casino's current events calendar. Little folded cards describing a jazz night on Thursdays and a culinary showcase on the coming weekend. And he set it down and picked it up and set it down again. Not fidgeting, just occupying his hands while the rest of him worked. He reached into his pocket and took out a small notepad, actual paper, a habit he had never broken, and he uncapped the pen clipped to its cover and wrote in his neat, compressed handwriting, Derek Solano, VIP, floor manager, Tuesday, 8:14 p.m. Couple blue shirt sundress souvenir cup. No card requested, no reservation checked. He capped the pen and put the notepad back in his pocket. Then he looked up directly at the lounge doors, as if the building itself were something he was waiting for a response from. Priya had been working the VIP corridor for 6 months. Before that, she had been on the main floor, running drinks and learning the names of regulars, and occasionally talking someone out of a 5th round, with a tactfulness that her floor supervisor had twice noted in her quarterly review and once described as a genuine gift. She was 26 years old and was putting herself through a part-time hospitality management program, and she thought about her career the way careful people think about buildings they are constructing. One good decision at a time. No shortcuts. Nothing built on ground she hadn't checked. She had been standing close enough to hear the entire exchange between Mr. Solano and the man in the dark polo shirt. She had seen the couple in the blue sports shirt and the sundress go through. She had seen the girl's face when it happened, and then the father's. And she had felt with uncomfortable clarity the specific texture of watching something wrong happen in slow motion, while your hands are technically full. She set her tray on the service ledge and walked to where Marcus and Zoe were sitting. She stopped a respectful distance away, close enough to be addressing them directly, far enough that it was still a choice to engage. "Sir," she said, "is there anything I can bring you while you wait? Water? Juice? For your daughter?" Marcus looked up. His eyes were the kind of calm that has weight to it. Not the calm of someone who has given up, but the calm of someone who has decided that the most useful thing they can do right now is pay very close attention. He looked at her name badge. "Thank you, Priya," he said. "We're okay for now." She nodded, started to turn back. "Actually," Marcus said, "can you tell me who the floor manager on duty is tonight? Above the VIP section." Priya paused. Internally, something shifted, the small, specific discomfort of being asked a question you know the answer to and are not sure you want to say. "Mr. Solano is VIP floor manager," she said carefully. "The general shift manager for the whole floor tonight is Karen Chu. She's usually near the main supervisor station." "Thank you," Marcus said. Priya went back to her station. She did not look at Mr. Solano. She picked up her tray. She thought about 6 months of employment and a hospitality management program and a lease she had signed. And then she thought about the girl's face. And she put down the tray, and she went and found Karen Chu. Karen Chu arrived 7 minutes later. She was 44 years old, experienced enough to read a situation from the doorway, and smart enough to have developed over 2 decades of shift management in hospitality, a thorough understanding of which problems needed to be walked toward and which needed to be sidestepped. She read Marcus and Zoe and the Platinum Lounge entrance and the position of Derek Solano with the focused speed of someone performing a calculation, and she walked toward Marcus. "Good evening, I'm Karen Chu, shift manager. I understand you had a question about the VIP lounge access policy." "A few questions," Marcus said. He stood not formally, just the reflex of someone who conducts conversations, standing up. "I'd like to understand the basis on which access decisions are made at that door." Karen looked at him with the careful look of someone who has had this conversation before and knows it has several possible shapes. "The Platinum Lounge is reserved for Platinum tier members and guests with advance reservations as outlined in our membership program. The requirements are applied consistently." "The requirements," Marcus said, "were not applied consistently approximately 10 minutes ago, at around 8:14, when a couple entered without being asked for membership credentials or reservation confirmation." Karen's expression did not flicker, but something behind it became more alert. "I wasn't personally present at that moment. I can look into it." "I'd appreciate that," she nodded. She took out her own small tablet. She was, Marcus noted, asking questions and writing things down, which was more than Derek had done. He gave her the time of the incident and a brief description of the couple. She wrote it all down. Derek had come back into the corridor during this exchange. He stood at a remove, with the posture of a man who believes he is about to be consulted and vindicated. The posture of a man who has been certain about more things than he has been wrong about, and has not yet recalibrated the ratio. Karen glanced at him. Derek, can you walk me through the interaction at the entrance at around 8:14? Derek straightened slightly. 2 guests requested entry, and I confirmed they were within our policy guidelines. Did you verify their platinum status? A beat. Their presentation was consistent with our current membership profile. The phrase had the quality of something that had been said before in meetings, and approved the kind of phrase that exists to cover the gap between what was done and what should have been done. Marcus let it sit for a moment, the way you let something rest to hear what sound it makes when the room around it goes quiet. Their presentation, Marcus said, his voice unchanged. Could you say more about what that means? Derek turned to Marcus with the look of a man who has decided that the other person in the conversation is the problem and is now going to address the problem directly. Sir, I've been patient with you this evening, but I've explained our policy multiple times, and I've been clear that without verifiable credentials or a reservation, I'm asking about the other guests, Marcus said, not about me. I'm going to need to ask you to lower your voice. Derek's tone had taken on a different quality now, still controlled, but with a new hardness under it, the kind that signals a shift from hospitality management to another kind of management. If this continues, I'm going to need to involve security. The word security was used the way it is sometimes used, not as a practical statement about a safety concern, but as a warning, a quiet deployment of authority to remind someone where they stand in the architecture of a space. Karen looked at Derek, a different look than before. Marcus nodded slowly once, not agreement, just acknowledgement. He reached into his pocket for the small notepad and added 2 lines under what he had already written. Karen Chu, shift manager. Derek Solano, presentation as access criterion. 8:31 p.m. Threat of security. The pen scratched quietly. Derek watched him write. Something crossed his face that was hard to name. Not quite alarm, not quite contempt. Something that belonged to the intersection of both. What are you doing? Taking notes, Marcus said. He capped the pen. I do it everywhere I go. It's a habit. Zoe from her chair had looked up from the phone. She was watching her father with that particular expression again, the one between suspicion and understanding, the question that wasn't ready to be said out loud. She had heard the word security. She understood what it was meant to mean. Her feet had stopped swinging. Marcus looked at his daughter. He held her gaze for 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, something passed between them that required no translation. A message about steadiness, about what the appropriate response to this moment was, about the difference between letting something happen to you and choosing how you exist inside it. Then he looked back at Derek. I'm going to stay seated here for a bit longer, he said. I'm not raising my voice. I'm not disrupting the floor. We're 2 people sitting in chairs near a corridor. If that's a violation of your policy, I'd like it cited specifically. Derek had no specific citation to offer because there wasn't one. He stood for a moment with the look of a man who has reached the edge of what his authority can actually do and is discovering with no pleasure where that edge is. Then he turned to Karen Chu and said at a volume he perhaps misjudged, This is the 3rd time this quarter someone's tried to push into VIP without credentials. Hargrove said specifically to hold the line. Karen looked at him with an expression that had gone very neutral very quickly. I'll handle this, Derek. He walked back toward the lounge entrance. Priya, at her station 10 feet away, was looking at the middle distance again, but her jaw was set in the particular way of someone who has just heard something they were not sure they would have the nerve to repeat, and has silently decided that actually, yes, they would. Karen turned back to Marcus. I'm going to look into the 8:14 incident personally. If there are any inconsistencies in how policy was applied, that will be addressed. I appreciate that, Marcus said. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight? Marcus considered the question. His phone buzzed against the table. He reached out and turned the screen up just enough to see bored, urgent, Delvane Grand CEO line. He turned it back down. Actually, he said, I think things are about to become a bit clearer. He said it calmly, without drama, the way you say something that is simply true. Would you mind staying nearby for the next few minutes? Karen Chu looked at him. Something in the way he had said it, the ownership in it, the absence of any performance of importance, the unruffled certainty pulled at something in her understanding of the situation. She'd been reading this wrong. She wasn't sure exactly how, but the recalibration was beginning. Of course, she said. She stayed. James Okafor had been watching from the main floor for 41 minutes. He had watched Marcus come through the lobby. He had received the small headshake, not now, and he had honored it because that was the deal, had always been the deal. Going back to a conversation 11 years ago when Marcus had told him, I need you to remember that when I'm here and I haven't told anyone I'm coming, I am not here. Not officially. Whatever you see, you give me the time I need. James had said, yes, sir, and meant it, and had been meaning it every quarter since. Across 4 ghost walks a year, times 11 years, which was 44 times he had watched this man move through this building unseen and learned each time something that only could be learned in that particular silence. But 41 minutes was a long time, and James Okafor had been in this building long enough to know the specific temperature of a situation that has been allowed to run too far. He knew what Derek Solano was. Not personally, not in any deep sense, but professionally, the way you know a type of weather from the particular way the air changes before it arrives. Derek had come to Delvane Grand 14 months ago, transferred from a property in Atlantic City that James had never had reason to investigate, and was now standing at the edge of the main floor at 9:02 on a Tuesday evening, wishing he had. He had watched Derek's body language through the whole exchange. He had watched Karen Chu arrive and stay. He had watched Priya set down her tray. And then he had watched Derek lean toward Karen and say something at a volume he should have modulated better. Something that included the phrase, hold the line, and a reference to a name James knew well. Hargrove, the COO. A man whose relationship with the idea of the casino's target clientele James had observed carefully over 14 months and had formed clear opinions about. There is a moment in every long patience when the patience becomes a kind of abdication. James recognized that moment when it arrived, the way you recognize a train you have been waiting for. Not because it announces itself, but because the platform begins to vibrate. He came off the main floor and walked through the casino the way he always walked, unhurried, straight-backed, the walk of a man whose size alone was enough to part a crowd, gently, without requiring any force. He came down the northern corridor, and he saw Marcus sitting with Zoe, his phone on the table, his hands in his lap, and he saw Karen Chu standing nearby, with the look of a woman recalibrating. He saw Derek by the lounge doors, arms crossed now, the body language of someone who has decided they have won and is waiting for confirmation. James came to a stop directly beside Marcus. He was quiet for one moment. He looked at Zoe. Zoe looked back at him with the assessment of a child who is trying to place someone in the known categories and finding with interest that they don't quite fit any of them. James gave her a small nod, the respectful kind, the kind that acknowledges a person rather than dismisses them. Then he straightened, and he turned his head slightly toward the lounge doors, and he spoke at a volume that was calibrated very precisely, not shouting, not projecting for drama, but the clear, carrying voice of someone who has worked in large rooms for decades and knows exactly how far a voice needs to travel to be heard by everyone who needs to hear it. Mr. Delvane, sir, James said. Your 9 o'clock board call just came in from your office upstairs. They've been trying to reach you on the main line. He paused. Then he turned his head slowly toward Derek Solano. "Do you know who this man is?" The question was simple. It was not theatrical. James said it the way you say something that has a factual answer. And he said it into a silence that had arrived the way silences arrive in large rooms when the ambient noise doesn't change, but the attention of the people in the room suddenly does. Everyone's still talking, still moving, still ordering drinks, but something pulling focus like a held breath. Derek Solano uncrossed his arms. His eyes moved from James to Marcus, then back to James. The motion had the quality of a person trying to find a reference point for something that their existing maps don't account for. James Okafor was wearing a security uniform, which was one of the 5 highest recognition roles in the building. James Okafor had called this man in the dark polo shirt and ink-stained khakis Mr. Delvain, with a specific form of address reserved for ownership. And James Okafor was looking at Derek now, with the particular expression of a man who has seen things he cannot unsee, and is giving someone exactly one opportunity to understand what that means. Marcus reached forward and picked up his phone from the table. He unlocked it. He turned the screen slowly, without drama, the movement of someone doing something ordinary. Toward the table, then slightly toward Karen Chu so the display was visible. The screen showed an outgoing call in progress. At the top, Delvain Grand CEO line. And beneath the timer, counting upward from 40 seconds, the name of the executive on the other end of the call, which was his own assistant's direct number. He had placed the call 10 seconds before James arrived. Zoe was watching her father the way children watch adults when the adults in the room have suddenly stopped performing and started being something more true than what they usually show. Derek looked at the phone. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the phone again. And then he looked at Marcus's face. And what he saw there was perhaps the most disorienting part of it, because Marcus Delvain was not angry. He was not triumphant. He was not looking at Derek with any particular heat at all. He was looking at Derek the way someone looks at something they need to understand completely. The way you look at a building when you're deciding what to do with it. Not with malice. Not with relish, but with the full, unhurried attention of a person who has the time and the authority to decide. Derek's mouth opened and then did not produce a sound, which is one of the body's more honest responses. Karen Chu had gone very still. Her tablet was in her hand, and she was no longer writing anything on it. She was looking at Marcus Delvain, and then at the name on the phone screen, and then at the casino around her, the amber lights, the marble floors, the gold plaque on the wooden doors of the Platinum Lounge, with the look of someone who is recalculating something at speed, and finding that the new numbers are very different from the old ones. James Okafor said nothing more. He stepped back half a step and stood with his hands clasped in front of him and let the room absorb what had just happened. Marcus put the phone to his ear. "Julia," he said into the call, "push the board briefing to 9:30, please." Something came up on the floor. A pause. "Yes, I'm in the building. Tell them I'll be upstairs shortly." He ended the call and set the phone back on the table. He looked at Zoe. She was looking at him with the wide, working expression of a child whose 2 versions of the world, the one in which her father was a man in a polo shirt being turned away from a room, and the one in which this building had his name on it, were in the process of resolving into a single, more complicated picture. "You own this," she said. Not a question. A statement arriving. "I do," he said. She looked around the corridor at the lights and the wooden doors, and Derek Solano standing very still near them and back at her father. "You didn't say anything." "No," he said. "Why not?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because it was the right question, the exact right question. The question that was going to require more than a corridor and the next few minutes to fully answer. Because I wanted to see what it looked like when no one knew, he said. And now I know. She sat with that for a moment. Her feet had started swinging again, slowly heels brushing the air. Dad? Yeah? It looked bad. I know, he said. That's what I needed to see. Near the lounge doors, Derek Solano had the look of a man watching the ground he had been standing on very confidently reassemble itself into something he did not recognize. He had not spoken since James's question. He had not moved in a way that indicated any plan for what to do next. The confidence had not left him all at once. It was leaving him the way heat leaves a room when a window is opened on a cold night. Not a sudden drop, but a progressive, unstoppable shift in the atmosphere. Karen Chu looked at James. James looked at Karen Chu. Something was communicated between two professionals who have both been in rooms where something has just changed in a fundamental way, and who understand, without needing to discuss it, that the time for managing the situation has ended, and the time for something else has begun. Marcus stood up, unhurried, and straightened his polo shirt with one hand. He looked at Derek Solano. He looked at the Platinum Lounge doors. He looked at his daughter, who had also stood and taken his hand and was holding it with a grip that was slightly tighter than usual. Okay, Marcus said to no one specifically. He said it the way you say a word that is not an ending, but a door being reached a threshold you have decided you are ready to cross. The board call was in 28 minutes. What needed to happen between now and then was going to happen in a room on the 4th floor, with people who needed to be in that room. He had the names, he had the timestamps, he had Priya's face and Karen Chu's tablet, and 41 years of knowing exactly what he had just seen. He reached down and took Zoe's hand more firmly, and they walked back toward the main floor and the amber light of the casino his father had never seen, and his mother had seen once, 2 months before she died, fell across them both as they went, and James Okafor fell into step behind them at a respectful distance, and none of them looked back at the lounge doors, and the lounge doors did not open. The office on the 4th floor was the one Marcus used when he needed to be in the building without being in the building, a room that most of the staff knew existed, but that few had reason to visit. With a desk that was always clean because he was almost never there, and a window that looks south over the casino's rear parking structure, and beyond it, the particular broken glitter of the Las Vegas night. He had put Zoe in the adjacent conference room with James, a pot of hot chocolate that James had organized with the thoroughness of a man who understood the operational requirements of a 10-year-old, and a tablet loaded with the show she was currently watching. He had told her he would be an hour, maybe less. She had said, okay, and then, Dad. And then when he turned back, you're going to fix it right. He had looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said. That's the plan. The board briefing went until 10:15. It was a standing operations call, occupancy numbers, VIP revenue, the food and beverage margins for the quarter, and Marcus listened and asked questions, with the part of his attention that was always available for numbers, while the other part was doing something else entirely. When the call ended, he sat at the desk for a few minutes and wrote out in full what he had observed and recorded that evening. Names, times, specific behaviors, the exact phrasing used. He wrote it out by hand first, then dictated a summary to Julia on the phone, who recorded and timestamped it, because documentation built before a conversation was more durable than documentation built during or after one. At 10:45, Karen Chu knocked and came in. She sat across the desk with the look of someone who has spent the last hour doing their own version of the same accounting. I pulled the access logs and the floor camera from the VIP corridor for tonight, she said without preamble. The couple at 814, they don't have platinum membership. They don't have a reservation on file. I looked back at the last 6 weeks of access records for Solano's shifts. She paused. There's a pattern. Tell me. She did. It took 10 minutes. When she was done, Marcus looked at the window and the parking structure and the broken glitter for a moment, and then he said, How far does the pattern go? At least the 14 months he's been here. Maybe longer if we pull comparative data from his previous property. We'll pull it. Yes, sir. He looked back at her. Who knows you're up here? Priya. She saw me come upstairs. She wanted me to know that she's willing to give a formal account of what she observed tonight. She said she's observed other incidents that she didn't know what to do about. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about Priya setting down her tray and going to find Karen Chu the specific calculation that had led to that decision. What it cost a 26-year-old working a VIP corridor shift to make that calculation and then act on it anyway. She's not going to be penalized for anything she reports, Marcus said. Make sure she knows that, specifically. Not generally, specifically. I will. What about Solano? Karen's expression settled. He's waiting in the shift manager's room downstairs. I told him to stay there and not interact with any floor staff until someone came for him. Does he know I'm up here? He knows that James Okafor escorted you to the executive floor. She paused. I think he's been doing the math for the last 2 hours. Marcus looked at the desk. The notepad was open in front of him. Derek Solano's name at the top, the timestamps below. He looked at it for a long moment, the way you look at something you have been moving toward for several hours and are now very close to. Let's go down, he said. The shift manager's room was a small, practical space off the back corridor of the ground floor. A room for paperwork and shift handovers, and the private conversations that floor management sometimes needed to have. Derek Solano was sitting in one of the 2 chairs along the near wall when Marcus came in. Karen Chu positioned herself near the door. Marcus sat down in the chair across from Derek, pulled it slightly so they were at an angle rather than directly face to face. Not combative. Just conversational, and set the notepad on his knee. Derek looked at the notepad, then at Marcus. He had had 2 hours, and whatever he had done with those 2 hours had not fully resolved the confusion that had been written on his face in the corridor. He still had the posture of a man trying to find the firm ground, but the ground had not firmed. I need you to walk me through your access decisions this evening, Marcus said. His voice was the same as it had been all night, even unhurried, quiet enough that you had to pay attention to hear it properly. Specifically, I want to understand the criteria you applied. Derek's hands resting on his thighs pressed down slightly. I applied the Platinum Lounge access policy, members and reservations. That's the written policy. The couple at 814, Marcus said. They're not members. They don't have a reservation. I've pulled the access logs. What criteria did you apply to them? Oh, Derek looked at the notepad. He was doing the calculation now, the calculation of what had been recorded and what could be defended, which was a different calculation from the one he'd been doing for the last 14 months, which had been the calculation of what he could do and not be challenged on. The 2 calculations produced very different numbers. I may have misread their status, Derek said. You may have. It was a busy floor. It wasn't particularly busy. I was there. Marcus looked at him steadily. I want to give you the opportunity to be accurate about this because accuracy matters for what happens next. I'm going to ask you directly. Did you apply the same access criteria to them that you applied to me? The question sat in the room. Derek's jaw moved slightly. I made a judgment call. Based on what? Another pause, longer this time. The silence in the room had the specific weight of something that has been in the air for a while and has finally been allowed to land. Presentation, Derek said. The same word he had used in the corridor, but it sounded different now, not like a policy term, but like what it had always been. A cover. Presentation, Marcus repeated. He said it once without inflection and let it be whatever it was in the room, without adding anything to it. Derek looked at the wall briefly, then back. I've been managing the VIP floor, under directives from Mr. Hargrove to prioritize the membership experience. The revenue numbers for Platinum. I know the revenue numbers, Marcus said. I see all the revenue numbers. Talk to me about the directives from Mr. Hargrove. What came next took 20 minutes. Derek talked not with the fluency of a man confessing, but with the halting, backward-building honesty of a man who has realized that the version of events he had planned to tell is no longer viable, and is constructing in real time a more accurate version from the materials available. He talked about a meeting with Hargrove 6 months ago about image standards for the VIP floor, about the phrase protecting the experience for our target demographic, used in a way that was never written down anywhere, but was understood, had been understood by Derek and 2 other floor managers to mean something specific. He talked about the pressure on VIP revenue numbers, about the implicit reward of strong quarterly reviews for managers who held the line, about the 2 complaints from other guests that had been filed, and he now understood had not made it past Hargrove's desk. Karen Chu was writing. Her expression had gone somewhere difficult to read. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was harder than it sounds. Not because he was angry. He was not angry. Not in the way that produces heat, but because he was sitting very close to something that had been costing people something real for 14 months or longer. And the distance between knowing a thing exists and sitting in a room with the specific shape of it is not a comfortable distance to be in. When Derek finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. The couple in the sundress and the blue shirt, Marcus said. Did you know them? Had you seen them before? No. Did you have any reason other than their appearance to believe they had platinum status? Derek said nothing, which was its own answer. Marcus nodded. He looked at the notepad. He looked at Derek. He looked at a spot somewhere between the 2, which was where the actual thing he needed to say lived. I built this casino 11 years ago, he said. I've eaten bad meals in this town, stayed in places that treated me like a problem, walked into rooms and had people decide things about me before I opened my mouth. I know what that is and what it costs. I didn't build this place to be another room that does that. And I'm going to have to think about what it means that it's been doing that for 14 months under my name. Derek was looking at him now with an expression that had moved beyond calculation into something more unguarded. Not quite remorse, not quite understanding, but the expression of a person standing at the edge of understanding it, looking at how far the drop is. Your employment is being suspended, pending a full review, Marcus said. Karen will walk you through the next steps. The review will be conducted fairly. You'll have the opportunity to respond to everything in writing, but I need you to understand something before you leave this room. He leaned forward slightly, the same slight angle, nothing threatening in it. This isn't about tonight. It's about a pattern. And patterns in organizations don't start with the people on the floor. They start higher up. So you're not the only person who's going to be having a conversation like this one. Derek said nothing. His hands were still on his thighs, the pressure gone out of them. He looked like a man who had spent 14 months being certain about something and was now discovering that certainty is not the same thing as being right, and that the distance between those 2 things can be very long and very costly to cross. Marcus stood. Karen? Sir? He left the room. The corridor outside was quiet and blue lit and smelled of the cleaning product used at the wrong concentration on the tiles, which he would also note to Carol Weston in the morning. He stood in the corridor for a moment. His hands were in the pockets of the khakis with the ink stain. The noise of the casino reached him from beyond 2 sets of doors, the low roar of a place in operation, a place full of people who had walked through the revolving glass doors and felt, as he had intended, like somewhere had been waiting for them. He was aware that the feeling and the reality had not been matching for some people for longer than he had known. That awareness was not a comfortable thing to carry. He did not put it down. He went back upstairs to get his daughter. James was sitting in the conference room with Zoe, talking about something Marcus heard. Zoe's voice first, the particular animated cadence of a 10-year-old who has found a subject they want to pursue to its complete conclusion. He stood in the doorway for a moment without announcing himself. "But how do you know," Zoe was saying, "when something is actually dangerous versus just feeling dangerous?" James thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "Usually," he said, "when it's actually dangerous, there's a specific thing you can point to. When it's just feeling dangerous, sometimes that's a feeling worth listening to anyway. But the difference is whether there's a fact behind it or just a feeling in front of it." Zoe considered this. What if the fact and the feeling are both there? Then you think about which one you can do something about, James said. Marcus knocked on the open door lightly. They both looked up. Zoe's face did the thing it did. The quick read, the information processing, the conclusion arrived at. And then she said, "Did you fix it?" He sat down in the chair beside her. "Started to," he said. She looked at him. "What's left?" He thought about Hargrove, about 2 complaints in a drawer, about a phrase used in a meeting 6 months ago that had never been written down, but had filtered down through 3 levels of management, like something seeping through the foundation before you find it in the basement. "A few things," he said. "It takes more than one night." Zoe was quiet for a moment. She pulled at the string of her purple hoodie, a habit she had when she was working something out. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "When that guy wouldn't let us in." She looked at him directly. "Was it because you're black?" The question was clean and exact and had no exits built into it. Marcus met her eyes. "I think that was part of it," he said. "I think there were other things too. Being alone, not dressing a certain way. But yes, part of it." She absorbed this. "That's not right." "No," he said. "It's not. Does it happen a lot?" He held the question for a moment, held it with the full weight it deserved, which was considerable. "More than it should," he said, "which is more than never." He looked at her. "And that's why tonight matters. Not because it happened to me, because it's been happening to other people. And tonight, we found out. And now something can be done about it." Zoe looked at the table between them, then at James, who was watching the conversation with the specific, attentive stillness of someone who knows when to hold the room without occupying it. Then at her father. "Okay," she said, and then, "Can we still get noodles? It's only 9:48. James, without being asked, reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small folded menu from the food court's noodle place, which he had apparently procured at some point in the previous hour through means Marcus decided not to investigate. "Kitchen closes at 10, James said, offering the menu. Zoe took it. "We need to go now," she said, standing with the urgency and clarity of a person for whom the noodle place closing was an injustice of the first order that still required addressing. Marcus looked at James, and James returned the look of a man who has spent 11 years working for this particular person and has concluded, with all the evidence available to him, that the job has been worth doing. "Come on then," Marcus said. They went. 6 weeks later, the Delvane Grand Casino introduced a revised training protocol for all guest-facing staff, with a mandatory bias awareness component that had been developed with the help of an external consultancy and reviewed by an employment practices attorney. The protocol replaced the previous largely unwritten brand image standards that COO Hargrove had administered informally, and it emerged in the internal review. Had never been submitted to the legal or HR departments for evaluation. Hargrove resigned before the review concluded. His resignation letter cited personal reasons, which no one disputed because the reasons were personal in the sense that he had made them personal across 14 months of informal directives. The two guest complaints that had not made it past Hargrove's desk were located, reviewed, and responded to. Both guests received a direct letter from Marcus, personal and specific, not a form letter. One of them, a woman who had visited the casino with her adult daughter for a birthday dinner and been turned away from the Platinum Lounge, wrote back. Her letter was 2 paragraphs and said in the second paragraph that she had not expected to hear from anyone and that hearing had mattered. Marcus kept the letter in the desk drawer of the 4th floor office. Derek Solano's employment was terminated following the completed review, which documented the pattern across 14 months and confirmed that his decision-making had been consistently influenced by factors unrelated to the stated access policy. He was informed of this in writing and given the opportunity to respond, which he did. His response was 3 pages long and acknowledged in the final paragraph that he had applied criteria that went beyond what was written. It was the most honest thing in the document, and Marcus read that paragraph 3 times. Priya Nair was promoted to VIP floor supervisor 8 weeks after that Tuesday evening. At her first staff meeting in that role, she told her team that the access policy existed on paper and would be applied exactly as it existed on paper, and that if anyone was ever unsure whether a decision they were making could be defended in writing, they should assume the answer was no and act accordingly. 2 of the staff members in that meeting had worked the VIP corridor for longer than Priya had been at the casino. Neither of them disagreed. On a Friday afternoon in late October, a family came through the lobby of Delvane Grand. A father, a mother, 2 kids, one of them in a stroller. Nobody dressed especially formally, the kind of family that is in a hotel casino because it is there, and the kids wanted to see the lights. They walked through the revolving glass doors and into the amber warmth of the lobby, and the father stopped just inside and looked at the room. And his expression was the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere and has not yet been told they don't belong there. A young woman in a white vest was crossing the lobby, and she saw them, and she stopped, and she said, "Welcome in. Is there anything I can help you find tonight?" The father looked at her. He looked slightly surprised, the way people look when something happens that they were not expecting, but that feels on some level like it was supposed to happen all along. "We're just looking around," he said. "Take your time," she said, and smiled at the kid in the stroller. "The lights in the north atrium change color on the hour. You've got about 10 minutes if you want to head that way." They headed that way. This is what it looks like when a place tries to be what it said it was going to be. Not perfectly, not all at once, but deliberately, one decision at a time, one employee who chooses to do the right thing, one policy put on paper so it can be held to. It does not erase the 14 months that came before. It does not fully answer the question Zoe Delvane asked in a corridor at 8:20 in the evening. The question that does not have a corridor-length answer. But it is not nothing. In buildings and in lives, it is not nothing to change the thing you can change, and do it carefully and do it honestly, and make sure this time it is written down.